Good afternoon, and thank you for coming to the presentation of the Masters in Research in Translation and Interpreting. I'll be talking for some time, and then I'll open the floor for any questions you may want to ask. Please type them in the question box, and I'll read them out and then answer the question. Well, we're talking about the Master's degree Research in Translation and Interpreting, which is a degree awarded by Universitat Jaume. But our faculty comes from a variety of universities around the world, and the master's program is delivered entirely online, and most of the coursework can be done on your own time rather than within a specific schedule. So this helps people from different parts of the globe and in different time zones participate without any major headaches. So when we need to get together with scheduled times that work for everyone or for most people involved, wherever they happen to be, and those who cannot attend can access the recording afterwards. So you can complete the master's online from anywhere in the world, no matter what time it is, because, well, you have deadlines for assignments, but you don't have to be physically present or attending online if you can't. Although you can also attend live sessions like this one. I'm presuming you're all interested in translation and interpreting, but you may be thinking whether focusing on research is the right choice. The most important thing I want to get across in this presentation is what sets a research master's apart from a professional master's, and why I think pursuing a research master's may be a very good move for you, for everyone nowadays. It boils down to those skills you can acquire, because research skills are transferable, meaning you can use them in any field and in any area of a specialization. In our case, we focus on applying them to translation and interpreting, but these skills allow you to develop new knowledge in different settings, not only in academia, but also in professional environments, for instance. They could even allow you to move from the field of translation and interpreting to any other, using the same skills, but applying them to a different area. So I'm going to structure the presentation around how to see that the master's and a research master's in general will allow you to think about reality in a specific way, geared toward problem solving, to plan how to solve those problems, and to create solutions that can be applied, well, firstly to translation and interpreting, but also to many other areas, many other social contexts, including professional settings. And in this regard, it's important to emphasize that translation and interpreting are social activities. Anything that allows us to collaborate with other people is considered a social activity. So the problems that can arise are complex. And when you train yourself to solve complex problems within the field of translation and interpreting, you're learning to manage social problems. And that gives you a broader perspective to apply those skills in a wide range of areas, not only within translation and interpreting specialisms like literary translation, legal translation, court interpreting, scientific translation, audiovisual translation. For the sake of brevity, I will only address one problem to show you an example, a problem that's very relevant right now with all the technology hype. It is a problem that's very much on our minds right now because of all the hype surrounding artificial intelligence in our society and machine translation in particular. So I'm going to give you an example so we can see how we can use the research skills we are acquiring in this master's to address issues that are happening in society all around us right now. So I'll give you this example, which is an example that happened in several countries around the world during the pandemic. And the situation is this: an institution uses machine translation to publish health information. I think this might sound familiar to all of you. You might be aware of cases where institutions published information on their institutional websites, their official websites, whether it was about vaccines, scientific advances related to the pandemic, or measures ranging from social distancing to any other steps taken during the pandemic to slow its spread. And since today's society is multilingual, these institutions had to serve a multilingual and multicultural public, but they were not equipped to offer the information in all those languages. And a quick fix was adopted internationally by using Google Translate API. This allowed the institution's websites to be translated almost immediately and simultaneously into the languages that Google Translate was set up for and had available, which obviously isn't all of them, but quite a few. And in those cases, there are already quite a few studies, and I'll give you one as an example, but there are some you can find around that show that machine translations, the outputs of machine translation systems, contributed to making the pandemic worse. And how? Well, in the sense that the results were not checked. So the outputs of machine translation had no supervision. There was no professional oversight. The translations weren't always clear or accurate enough to allow people reading them to know how to act in the same way as people who had access to the original text published by the institution. So what happened? Well, there was no one involved in the decision-making who had research skills to foresee the problems that actually arose in this area, which in this case was related to translation. But the general public's opinion at the moment can be summarized in this phrase you see on the screen. Human translation, professional translation is expensive, it is slow, and machine translation, on the other hand, is fast, it's cheap, and it works. Well, that's what anyone may think if they don't have research skills or haven't been trained to investigate and dig deeper than the beliefs that might be spread by certain interested parties, because obviously all this hype benefits some companies. And some of what I'm about to tell you is already covered in this article, and I've put up a shortened link so you can find it easily. But I'm going to ask different questions that were not addressed in this particular article. But even so, from a research perspective, we could ask ourselves questions that would be useful in deciding what to do in a similar situation if we find ourselves working for an institution or a company that has to make that decision. So this article can be useful in that setting. Let's consider the decision or the situation where the question was raised or may be raised in the future of the question of whether to adapt machine translation to replace professional translation. So obviously, the first thing to do is to consider the risks, to anticipate the risks. So the first question we ask ourselves is whether machine translation in this specific context will be a problem. To determine if it's a problem, we have to remember that anything social doesn't just involve one group of people. There are usually many more stakeholders. So who would the stakeholders be in this decision? So for starters, all the social groups that need to receive the translated information, but also all the workers, the employees of the company or the institution who may receive questions if the translations are not effective, if the information that the institution puts out isn't self-explanatory or actionable. So this could be the case with the health information we were talking about. So hospital staff might have to deal with people who are not clear on what they need to do. Whereas with a more careful or polished translation or professional translation, perhaps the hospital staff wouldn't have to devote as much time and resources to clarifying things and would be able to do their work instead. So besides whether the translation works or not, and after identifying the potential problems for these stakeholders, we could also ask whether they feel well served. Because institutions, especially companies, often really want people to feel connected to the products, to create some loyalty. And also institutions, they want people to collaborate, to be able to follow their policies and to believe that their policies are legitimate, because that's one of the sources of our democratic will when we go and vote, right? That things are working for us. So we could see that it is important to measure, to gauge the level of satisfaction that the population, the different population groups, the different stakeholders have with machine translation outputs. So we could also see if machine translation creates more or fewer problems than professional translation, or if we increase the number of problems we have with machine translation compared to having no translation at all or having professional translation. All of these situations can be compared. And since we already know, and let's remember that if we're in a research master's program, we learn what questions have already been asked, and especially which ones have already been answered. And so we learn the answers to past similar problems. We can know if we've been trained in research that machine translation has biases. It produces biased outputs, and specifically the text exacerbate the sexist, the classist, the ageist, the ableist biases that already exist in society. And they also exacerbate stereotypes associated with certain social groups, cultural groups, or even languages. So the adjectives that accompany them when they appear in the text, in translated and machine translated text, exacerbate associations we may find in the real world, but they make them more present because they always produce the same translations. So for instance, translating strong dancer would be masculine, and whereas translating beautiful dancer would be feminine. So we see this stereotype. Also, doctors and nurses, it would be translated as masculine for doctors and feminine for nurses. You can try with Google Translate. We could consider the reasons behind the decision to acquire or start communicating through machine translation and how they match if we want these outputs to be this biased, unless, of course, we provide human professional oversight. And we could investigate either from within the institution or from academia, depending on where we are, what that institution's budget was, or what its budget is if it hasn't made a decision yet, and how it's allocated and what the possibilities would be for reallocating it. It would also be very good to know who makes the decision, and in addition to who makes it, whether or not they're in contact with the results, with the outputs, with the users of those outputs, with the people who will experience the effects of the decision, the decision to switch to a machine translation policy. So furthermore, from the groups of stakeholders we've identified, who would experience what effects from machine translation being used, and what channels of communication, of awareness would the institution or the company have to be able to react if something wrong happens, so something we haven't foreseen happens, so that we can fix it as soon as it emerges. So you probably wouldn't have thought of all these questions right now, and I'm throwing them at you, but I'm throwing them because I've been able to learn to formulate questions and to formulate them relatively quickly. And I'm sure you've been in situations where you've been asked, do you have any questions? And at that moment, you didn't have any, but 5 minutes later or 2 hours later, you start to have questions that you no longer have the opportunity to ask. So our research masters trains you to be quick at formulating questions because you're used to seeing objects, social objects in this case, social situations from different angles, to be able to quickly know what's needed to make the right decision, or to even see what problems may come from a particular solution. So the ability to think that you acquire with research master's programs, they will allow you to see problems, to formulate questions, but they also give you resources to find relevant information, to select relevant information to choose, and not just what article do I have to read or what company documentation do I have to read, but to know how to scan the documentation, to read efficiently, to get the information as quickly as possible, and to be able to then abstract, which is a skill that the master's also develops, to be able to apply knowledge to a new situation, which would be the problem you have at hand. You can solve them based on past research, but you will develop new resources and new solutions for the specific problem at hand. So in addition to finding information, if we identify gaps in information, we have methods for working with empirical world, with reality, to obtain more data and more information that might not be immediately accessible and that hasn't already been generated. So with our research skills, we can create new information, and once we have it, we can analyze it. And from that analysis, we can observe, we can see the solution can become clear to us, a solution that's based on evidence, on facts, on empirical data, and not just on beliefs and biased perceptions. And we can contribute more creative solutions because we're used to simply seeing how things have been solved in other cases, in situations that have maybe minimal, even if it's minimal, but a relationship to the object of study, of inquiry that we're dealing with in this specific research. You get used to seeing different ways of solving things, from reading, from analyzing, and even if it's a quick analysis, the sources that you start to master in the program offer you new insights on new problems. And from there, different things occur in your mind because you start to connect things that perhaps outside of the research environment, we don't tend to connect. And of course, the first thing the master's program teaches is how to ask questions and ultimately how to answer them. This involves learning what others have asked before, what they have managed to solve, and what has remained unresolved. At first, you read and you may wonder, how did they even think to ask that? But gradually, you begin to formulate increasingly insightful and creative questions yourself, including ones you may not have previously associated with translation and interpreting. So you become attuned to a particular way of seeing and critically questioning reality, one that enables you to identify not only what has been explored, but also what has yet to be asked. And there is still a great deal that remains unexamined, not only because translation and interpreting studies is a young academic discipline, but also because access to the university and to research careers has only been democratized relatively recently. Not all social groups have historically had the opportunity to engage in academic or professional research, whether within universities or in other contexts. So if you belong to a social group that has not been adequately represented in translation and interpreting research, it is essential for the discipline that you come on board for translation and interpreting studies to consider the broader structure of our societies. We are evolving collectively, but we have been shaped by classism, sexism, racism, ableism, and ideologies of linguistic monolingualism. And I do not mean that societies have operated in a single language in practice, but rather that they have privileged one language over others in institutional behavior, but also institutional frameworks. So if we can bring our multilingualism or our own identity to the academic world, to the world of research, we can bring a perspective that has been marginalized up to this point, then we are enriching the field and we are allowing the field to see the same problems from different angles, or maybe to identify new problems because they were not problems for specific social groups. So once we learn to formulate new questions, we also learn how to address them. We do so by following scientific methods. And these methods are continually evolving because the reality that we have to understand is itself in constant transformation. So to date, we have not developed or discovered a more specific, a more effective framework for problem solving, and the scientific method is the best until now. So when new methods do emerge, as they inevitably will, they will be incorporated into the repertoire of research skills that underpin scientific inquiry. And scientific methods enable us to reach consistent results, independent of who conducts the research and what their subjective perspective may be. Of course, your choice of research topic, your object of study may differ from someone else's, and that is precisely where your individual contribution lies. But by adhering to a method that is transparent and openly discussed across disciplines, specialisms, and social cultural contexts, we are able to construct a pathway that allows for our findings to be credible, to be rigorous. And this process ensures that our solutions are not only feasible within our immediate environment, but that they can also be recognized as valid and applicable in broader real world contexts. So if we apply this framework to the case we were discussing, we can envision various designs or methodological paths leading to a solution for the problem at hand. For example, we can ask ourselves if, to address the problem of knowing whether machine translation works in a given case, can we ask people if they think it works? That might help. If they think it works, well, perhaps that's not the best or most efficient method to know, because it may be like asking a turtle if it's slow, so you can get the best perspective. But we may want to watch someone translating with one of the systems. Would that help us see if machine translation works? Well, not really, because we're not interested in whether it works for that person or if it allows that person to move forward. We're interested in whether it is effective for a specific social context. So then we may ask the translators working in that context if it works for them. Would that really give us the solution? So maybe not, because we already know that our perceptions are biased because we're part of a society that has biased views. And what we're trying to do is overcome those biases through research. So, okay, then we could take a text and give it to a specific translation system to translate and then analyze the output. We could do that, but it wouldn't tell us if it's going to work. Even if we analyze one text with one translation system, it can't fully answer our question. It can get us closer to a solution, but we're not quite there yet. What if we tried different machine translation systems? Well, then we'd have more data to determine if any system works better than another, but we still haven't determined if it can really work in that specific context and for the specific audience that needs to do something in that context. What we could do is take a text or a set of texts that are representative of what's translated in that situation by that institution, or in the communicative situations in which that institution participates. And from there, we see that if that institution, if it works for what that institution is seeking. So does that institution have a goal of social justice? In that case, would it be concerned if the text generates stereotypes against certain social groups, for instance, women? So the translations generated by the machine translation system or by large language models like ChatGPT, if they are sexist, then perhaps that translation isn't suitable for that specific institution. Or perhaps the institution isn't interested in simply leaving the translations as they come from the machine translation system if they reinforce stereotypes. So maybe the institution is interested in disseminating knowledge of its policies so that its policies are actually implemented. So that so those policies would need to be understood from the translations given to society. So that would make it interesting to analyze whether in the translated language those instructions can be followed, and whether if they are actionable, and whether the person will do the same thing as someone who's reading the original text. We're also interested in knowing about the hallucinations. Hallucinations seems like a common word, but it's a term used for a phenomenon that's very frequent in machine translation systems, but also in artificial intelligence in general. And that is that the machines make things up. That translations end up having information that did not exist in the original, or that's different from what existed in the original. And that's when we say machines hallucinate. So, well, if we think about it this way, if we can formulate all these questions, we're seeing beyond the surface. We're anticipating problems. We're providing a more solid foundation for developing policies, for making decisions. So that's why it's important to know how to think, because we can anticipate, we can also react more quickly because we identify problems earlier. When we have a more global view of the objects we are studying, we can identify what isn't working quickly, and we can eliminate biases. We train ourselves to eliminate biases when analyzing data and when designing the data collection, so that we can see things that we generally wouldn't see, because humans, we are biased, and we do acknowledge that we are when conducting research, although we train to identify them. So identify the biases. And so we can read data, we can study data, we can analyze data in a way that our decisions can be based on evidence in the real world and not on beliefs or on how we construct that real world ourselves. It also shows us that solutions should be taken from a much more holistic point of view than they usually are. And when someone offers you a simple solution, generally, they're not really looking at the whole picture, and they're not trying to find the solution, but something that's comfortable, that suits them. And that's very easy to see. When automation started, or rather when job displacement due to automation started, the press very quickly blamed immigration for the job losses. And that was a very simple solution that allowed certain sectors up the ladder to continue doing what they were doing without sharing the benefits. So you always have to think that when something seems too simple, it is probably too simple. And also, training in research allows you to see that there are many people who have generated knowledge that doesn't usually reach society and that you can access. So you feel much more supported in your endeavors to generate new knowledge. And you also allow yourself not to be responsible for solving absolutely everything you see. And to know how to think, to know how to plan, and finally to know how to create, and how do you learn to plan in the master's program. So in the master's program, you take a series of courses that require you to complete assignments that resemble a research project. So they may involve designing an original project or executing a pre-designed project, replicating it. And with each task will require the application of distinct methodological approaches. Through this process, you begin to understand what conducting research actually entails. So you not only learn how to implement these projects, but also how to manage them within the constraints of your schedule. You develop a sense of how much time each task requires, what outcomes are realistic, and how to pace your work. So by gradually testing different methods, different approaches, you begin to clarify your own research interest and your own preferences. And eventually you reach a point where you can plan your work independently through a research project where you will be supervised. And you have control over the methods, the timeline, the workflow across all the coursework, and then in the final master's project, you take responsibility for a substantial research endeavor. And you go from a lot of guidance to less guidance. And this process equips you to explore unfamiliar research areas with an informed understanding of potential risk and a realistic view of the possible impact on your work. And finally, you'll be able to generate knowledge from your chosen topic with your own perspective, which is what will always distinguish your research. So even if you take an object that's already been studied, if you want to replicate an experiment that has already been done, your own perspective, the circumstances of the object you choose, will allow you to generate new knowledge that will then serve as a basis for other people to continue in that same line of inquiry. And well, that's more or less, in general terms, the skills you acquire by studying research masters. But we can also see, and we're going to see now, some of the final master's projects that have already been developed within the master's research in translation and interpreting at the Universitat Jaume. I've grouped some of them in the university's repository. You have the complete list, but here I've selected a few to group them by topics that I think might be interesting, or by perspectives that I think may interest you. For example, if you're already working, you can choose a topic that has to do with your own workplace. And here's an example of someone who was working in secondary education and observed problems with inclusion in their classes. They decided to implement a project based on knowledge gained about assimilation and intercultural communication, about linguistic discrimination. And they designed an intervention in their own class, in their own group of students. And in fact, this final project received an award for the best final master's project in the field of language rights in 2022. Another example was used audiovisual translation to improve English classes. And another person who was working in the field of law observed problems with legal interpreting and focused on studying what those problems were in order to develop possible solutions. In addition, some people have focused on pursuing their social activist interest, and there are people who advocate for clearer and more accessible political language for citizens. And that's what was done recently in a 2023 final dissertation. Also, people interested in inclusive language, the social inclusion of both women and non-binary genders, people who identify as non-binary, they looked at how to influence the use of inclusive language in publishing houses, how to influence reception to convince people that it was possible and it wouldn't cause rejection to use that language. There were also other initiatives to improve sign language interpreting in courts or healthcare interpreting in specific contexts. Some people who found themselves in an academic environment that perhaps neglected some of the perspectives of translation and interpreting studies, they have dedicated themselves to creating a map of whether, for example, in Venezuela, social and cognitive approaches were being overlooked. Others have focused on European studies or studies in Spain to see how non-professional interpreting and translation were being perceived, and whether the gender of people who engaged in non-professional translation and interpreting was being taken into account, and how that could generate intersectional factors of discrimination. There have also been final dissertations on a variety of languages on topics related to Catalan, related to Swedish, Chinese culture, Hebrew, but others also that are not listed here have also dealt with Arabic, Russian, and other language combinations. The master's doesn't set a limit in that sense because it focuses on research strategies. You can also see the variety of research we have conducted on Google Scholar, or also attend our international conference where students will share 1-minute videos of their final projects. And after training with the final dissertation, some people have decided to transform their dissertation into articles, and those have been published, have successfully passed evaluation processes, and have managed to publish their work in important journals. The research projects that have been covered so far, they cover a wide range of topics, some of them groundbreaking, and they have also been carried out with a wide range of methods. Some people really like working with other people, and so it's better for them to focus on topics that they can really feel motivated to research using interviews, surveys, interactions, experiments with people, observations of their own groups in their own work environment, or in-depth interviews that allow them to closely understand the experience of a specific interpreters or translators. On the other hand, there are other people who prefer more individual work and have focused on corpus analysis of translations or scientific publications. Each person knows their own motivations, what encourages them to continue, and the research method of your dissertation can also be tailored to your personal characteristics. And this is what I say, but I've selected some testimonials from people who have spoken about the masters. This person, Belen, had extensive professional experience in sign language interpreting and saw problems in her daily work that she has been able to see with different eyes and has been able to solve, especially issues of social prestige of the interpretive functions she performs in her daily life. And as she herself acknowledges, the master's has allowed her to be more critical of herself and to evolve, to improve her daily work. Raiko is now a professor and has published extensively in the field. Triana said that the master's gave her training that would have cost her much more money in the United States, and that she has been able to participate in conferences and publish work because she has acquired the necessary skills. Also, Anna commented on the possibility of studying remotely from anywhere in the world, and that despite the distance, the attention offered by the faculty were personalized and helped students progress quickly, so that in a year you can be doing your final dissertation without much difficulty. All of this is structured in a study plan, in a course of study that offers a first month with 2 introductory courses. And you don't have to take both in 1 year, and you can pace yourself according to your availability. But you have introductions in the first month of the year, and then each month you will be offered 2 courses, and once they end, 2 more will begin. So each month you will have two courses. You can choose to do both or just one. And then our third term is entirely focused on your final master's project. You can start working on your project from the very beginning if you already know what you want to do, or you can wait and start one once you finish all the courses. You can see more about the courses and the faculty on our webpage. And now some specific advice for you if you're planning to enroll. You can contact me whenever you want. You have the address on the master's website so that you can decide if you're going to take the master's in 1 or several years. If you need help deciding that, you can also contact me. If you take it full-time or if you take it part-time, that will make the workload be quite different. And I remember one person who was doing 3 master's degrees at the same time, and they were going through some issues in their life, plus taking all those extra work. They were able to complete the master's, but they slept very little that year. So it may be wise to ask whether your plans are feasible, or they may lead you to not that pleasant experience during that year. If you're working, perhaps doing the master's in 1 year is too demanding, but we can talk about that. In any case, people who have completed the master's say they need between 15 and 25 hours per week when taking the master's full-time. And well, here you have the list of the master's faculty. You can contact any of them. You can also contact me through the email address of the master's program. The committee includes myself, Ester Monzó, Robert Martinez Carrasco, Maria Calzada, and Josep Marco. You can write to any of us and ask whatever you need, whenever you want. If you want to contact the faculty, you have the list here. And if there's any of the lectures you don't know, chances are high that you can register for a lecture they are offering in order to get to know their research. Just Google their name or search their names on YouTube. Also, you can register for any of our lectures in the lecture series we organize to accompany the courses, so that you can become familiar with the diversity of topics, the perspectives in translation and interpreting studies. Tomorrow we have a lecture. I encourage you to enroll for that one with Professor Melissa Wallace, and that will be held at 4 p.m. You can also check our program, which is regularly updated. And if you have research ideas, you can also check out the research labs we have, or research groups we have. You can review what they have done to see more or less what they're doing, and if you'd like to join the research. And once you've decided, you can pre-register. enrollment begins later, but first your documents will be reviewed, and then you will be asked for any documentation you may have missed. Once everyone's documents have been checked, then registration begins. And registration is a very quick online process, but usually we humans are not that good with paperwork, so there's more time for that. And these are the 3 intake periods, and the 3 of them occur before the first term begins. So there's no intake in the middle of the year. The courses start on September 29th this year. So this, it would be better if you started, so if you register before the final deadline for the 3rd registration, so that you can start the courses the first day. So now it's your turn. Any questions you'd like to ask? Please feel free to take the floor to write any questions on this box, and I'll answer them. So the question Jennifer is asking, does this master's program also prepare us for professional careers, or is it more focused on continuing toward a PhD? The master's can prepare you to continue toward a PhD, but the skills it gives you can be applied in professional careers, and they can help you identify, for instance, professional norms that are applied in a particular workplace environment more quickly than you would if you hadn't those research skills. But it won't teach you how to translate. It may teach you how some period, how specific translation norms were in use in a specific period or in a specific place, or it may help you understand quickly what translation norms are in place in a specific workplace, but it doesn't train you to translate or to interpret. So it does prepare you for professional careers, but not in the sense of practicing translation.
Ester, moltes gràcies, però ja... sí. Despediste. Pare de gravar, ¿vale?
But
gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. So if you have any questions, please use the email and I'll answer. We can meet online whenever you want.